Welcome back. Today I'd like to analyze a recently concluded daily game from chess.com. I haven't looked at the game review or analysis yet, even though just as I started this video I clicked on the screen to run the game review. But the reason that I chose this game to analyze is because while I was playing it, I had a feeling just about the midway point or a little bit past midway that my opponent suddenly started playing much better than they had been. I was pretty sure I was ahead, but then it started to feel like every move they made was really good and I didn't have a great response to it. And then after a few more moves like that, I started to feel like I wasn't ahead anymore, and I was pretty sure I was behind. And then right at the end, they made what looked like to be an elementary level blunder, and after I took advantage of that, they just resigned. And so I want to look at the analysis and see if my feeling was correct or, if something else went on. I'm going to switch over to the other screen so you can see the graph that I am now seeing for the first time. It does look like I was ahead. I was playing with the white pieces as much as +4, maybe +5 at one point. But then there were a series of mishaps in which we came close to very even, with maybe my opponent having a slight advantage, and then they did have a greater advantage. And then there's the obvious blunder near the end. And I say obvious, it looked very obvious and very elementary to me. However, all of this section right here where I lost my advantage, nothing about that was obvious, but it might have been to my opponent. And that's why I wanted to take, less of a biased look. It's been a few days since this game ended. According to this, it says my opponent played slightly better than I did. And you can't quite see it down here, but the game review estimator says I played like a 650, which is pretty bad, especially in daily games. And my opponent played like a 700. Which is slightly better than me. It's always weird when it shows that your opponent played slightly better than you, but then you won. I really don't know where to start in this, and I don't want to take all day on it, but it looks like right about here is where I was very slightly ahead and started to go further ahead. I was very slightly ahead when I first clicked on it, but now Stockfish says we're basically even. It took it a second to figure that out. If they take, not here, but F takes G5. No, I misread that. If they play bishop to d3, which is way down here, that's their only move in this position. The only move that maintains equality. Well, I don't know if I would have found that if I were them, and they did not find that. I kind of see the point, I guess, that it keeps this pawn, my d pawn, from going forward, but it doesn't trap my queen in. I mean, my queen my queen can get out at any point. Also, my queen could move over and, come out this way. I can always move this pawn and get the bishop out and move the queen somewhere else. So it's also not really threatening the knight. Do you want to give up a bishop for a knight? Because the knight's protected. It's also very easy to protect the knight with the rook one way or another. And if they did play that, it says I would play knight to d5, which I probably wouldn't have. I probably just would have taken a couple of these pawns. Yeah, looking back, if they had played their best move, I definitely would not have put this knight here because that knight's protecting the knight that they're attacking. Their second best move would have been to take the g pawn, but instead they took the f pawn, which is kind of why I moved it up there. I thought they might take it, and then I could either, throw my rook up there or take with this pawn, and then there would be an open file, looking at their king. So they took there, and I did take with my e pawn, which gave me an open file looking at their king, but that was an inaccuracy, even though it's almost as good as my best move, which would have been to take with the knight. I guess taking with the knight attacks the bishop and protects the spot that Stockfish wanted to move the bishop to, but I didn't know that the engine wanted them to move the bishop here. If I had known that, maybe I would have taken with the knight. I'm not sure. I guess I can understand not taking with the rook, because then they could take here, and I have to move my rook back, I guess. Okay, but I took here, which it says is inaccurate, but I'm up plus 1.7 now. And again, the idea is that there's pieces instead of pawns between my back rank and their king. Again, they're supposed to play bishop to d3. And the engine says if they had played that, I would have put my rook up here. Maybe I would have found that. I don't know, but that's what it says. And then it says they would have played knight d to e5, that's e5, right? And I wouldn't take it. Why wouldn't I take it? I guess if I took it, then they could put their other knight there. It says I would move my rook over slightly instead. Oh, wow. Well, that's really complicated. I'm not surprised that my opponent didn't find that, and I probably would have played it incorrectly if they had. Their second best move is to take this pawn, but instead they moved forward, which locks up this position. I don't know why that's worse. I'm pretty sure if they had taken like it said, then I would have taken back, and then I would have had this rook on an open file, preventing them from castling. And it still says that they would play bishop to d3 at that point. All right. But instead they moved forward, which locks this pawn here. And I mean, all these pawns are kind of locked in place, right? They're not going anywhere. I think maybe the problem with that is that it also locks their bishop. Not fully locks it because their bishop, in order to go anywhere, has to come back now. It already went way up here for some reason, and it has to come back in order to point at anything. Its own pawns are blocking it in. I think I understand that. Now, if it does come back, this pawn is going to be hanging, so the engine thinks I should protect it before they move the bishop back, and then they're going to castle. Or I could just play d4 now. That way, if they brought the bishop back, I guess I could push the pawn forward one. But either way, it says that they would castle, and then I would play b3 or d4 either way after that. Just my two moves there are in a different order, and the evaluation is about the same. And either way, after they castled, their next move would be a5. Okay, I guess. I played a3 here, and it wasn't counted as a bad move. And the reason I did is because I just have a ton of opponents that, put a knight in here, and then it just stays there. So I thought, why not keep it from going there in the first place? That lost a little bit of my advantage. Bringing their bishop back was one of their best moves, and now I can play d4 instead of b3. Okay, well, I'm not sure why d4 is better, but I did play b3 here. Oh, and the game review thought that was my best move. But just to be clear, I'm not sure why I'm up plus 2.4 here. I'm not up any material. As far as I can tell, none of their stuff is in danger right now. The only, I guess, weird thing about their position is that they've launched these two pawns far forward, so they really shouldn't castle behind them. But that also applies to my position, because I have two pawns that have launched really far forward, and I am castled behind them. So I don't know why this makes it any better for me. And they've actually developed all four minor pieces, which I haven't yet. I'm about to on the next turn, but why are they ahead? If anybody knows, explain to me why my opponent is ahead. They should castle here or play knight to b6. Really not sure why. It can't go anywhere from there, right? It can't go to any of those normal squares. I mean, I guess it could go back where it is. All right, I have pawns. I have pawns guarding these squares. So why would they put that knight on b6? Because it can't go anywhere. Is it getting out of the way of the queen? Or is it trying to reroute back here to maybe get in behind this pawn after they move their a pawn? Yeah, I have no idea why they would want to move their knight to b6, or castle for that matter, again, with these pawns moved forward. I felt like when I did mine, it was like a matter of necessity in response to them moving theirs forward. But either way, both of us look like our king side is messed up here. They played g6, which bumped my advantage up just a little bit, and bishop to b2 is one of my two best moves. Okay, so now my minor pieces are developed. And again, they should castle or play rook to h7. What h7 is? What? All right, well, this was probably a bad place to start looking at this game because I really don't understand most of these moves. But they did castle, which was their best move as we saw. My best move is to go ahead and develop my queen, and then they would push this rook over. Or knight to d5. Well, I played d4. And the reason I played d4 is because I wanted to take more space. That's one of the ideas in chess, at least most of the time. One of many ideas is to take space. That pawn is pretty well protected by two of my pieces, so I wasn't too worried about it. Their knight's not going to take it. They also can't push their c-pawn just yet because their knight's in the way, and they can't get their knight out of the way because I guess they could put it back where it was. They can't really move that bishop either until they move the rook or the queen in order to get that bishop out of the way there. Their best move is knight to a5 is what? Okay, again, they're putting a knight where it can't go anywhere. This pawn's protected, that pawn's protected. It can't go back. Maybe that's why I'm ahead, is because their movement is limited. Okay, now they played knight to b6, but it was counted as inaccurate. And oh, I'm up +3. Oh, it said +3 for a second on the little bar, but it's 2.8, 2.9. And I should play d5. Well, I did, but that was because that's one of the reasons you want to play d4 in the first place, is to play d5. I do remember hesitating here. I wondered if I shouldn't take the knight first, which would double their pawns. But then I was like, wait, then I can't play d5 because they can just take it. And that kind of undoubles their pawns, I guess. Okay, so I was playing slightly better than my opponent here, as you can see, with taking more space, positioning my pieces in better places. Another reason I wanted to play d5, of course, is because this bishop's pointed down through here and they don't have any pawns there anymore. So my dark squared bishop, once my knight gets out of the way, is controlling important squares down there. My light squared bishop is pointed at less than it used to be because I just blocked it off with a pawn. But, it's still helping to protect my king. I also feel like before too long, I ought to be able to get my knight in somewhere. I'm not sure exactly how. I can bring either or both rooks to the party here. Maybe, get the queen out of the way of them. But +3 is a pretty high evaluation for this, isn't it? I guess the point I'm making here, or trying to make by going through this and also trying to learn, is that my opponent wasn't playing like a grandmaster at this point. And if we skip ahead to, say, move 29 or something, I'm still up +3. I want to go back and look at the graph to see where are we on this graph. Okay, we're not at my highest point. Here, according to the graph, was my highest point. I'm up about +5, which is move 26. And I should have either brought my queen over to e2, played knight to b5. Oh, because they can't protect. Yeah, they can protect that pawn. It says they wouldn't, but they could. It also says I wouldn't take it. So again, what's the point of putting a piece in a place to attack another thing and then not do it? At no point would I take that A pawn, so I'm not sure why I would be attacking it. Now here, I'm not sure what my plan was, but I did know that I wanted to get out of the way of this bishop, so I put my knight down here on d1. I think what I was trying to come up with was to maybe move the bishop up and put the knight behind it, or reposition the knight some other way, like maybe coming over to f2 and then to d3 and so on. But either way, getting out of the bishop, and that's why I did that. But that lost a full point, almost a full point of my advantage, even though it wasn't counted as inaccurate. Now here, my opponent played their absolute best move, which is to drop this bishop back to d8. So right here, maybe not during the game, but during this analysis, I'm guessing that right here is where I started getting that feeling. Now, if you look at the graph here, I was definitely wrong. They weren't playing the best move every time through this stretch. It just felt like it to me during the game. But is that what you would play here? I mean, you wouldn't go the other way with it, right? Because then the rook's basically free. But why would you move it at all is what I want to know. The bishop is well protected by two major pieces, so I'm not going to be scurrying down there to take it. Why not leave it where it is? Why not get the knights out of the way of these pawns and start shooting some pawns forward? I mean, that might be what I would be thinking of here. Or maybe start shooting the pawns forward now. Let there be an exchange. But their absolute best move was to drop it back to d8. Now, my best move is rook to e6, which I guess I kind of see because I'm controlling more things, more squares in their side of the board. I would be protected by the pawn, still protected by the other rook. But, I mean, it's also well protected where it is, and it's, helping control most of this file. The knight's on it. The other rook's on it. I don't know what the problem with that spot is. c5 is my next best move. It says they would take it, and then I would play queen to e2. Well, what I did was play bishop to d4, but that's inaccurate. It lost about half my advantage. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, my idea was to maybe put a queen behind it, but also I'm adding an extra defender to the rook. Here my opponent should play c6 or c5, and either way I would take it. And then either way they would take me with their b pawn. And either way, then I would play bishop to a1, bringing this bishop all the way back, and then they would take this rook, and I would take with my knight, and then they would bring the other rook over to that file. Well, then why would I take with the knight if I expected them to do that? But yeah, you can see the two lines are basically identical, but except for the first move, c5 or c6. Okay, so, if my opponent was looking at an engine, that's what they would have played, but they weren't looking at an engine. They took the rook first, which wasn't much worse. And again, it says I should take with the knight, and then they would pen the knight. But that's why I didn't take with the knight. Even though it's worse, I took with the rook, because now, yes, they can bring this over, but my rook's protected. Whereas if it was in the back rank, it would not be protected, and I would have a piece pinned to it. It is still their best move, their absolute best move, to play rook to e8, and they did. I'm supposed to play bishop to a1 for unknown reasons, or c5, but not b5. b5 is a mistake. The reason b5 is a mistake is because they can play knight to c5. Okay, that one's kind of obvious. You don't want to drop it back at this point because then it wouldn't be able to come back out. So I get that they would go to c5 with it, but now we're back under +1, so nearly even, and my best move is king to h2. Not sure why. Now remember earlier when I moved this knight down here to get out of the way of the bishop, one thing that I was thinking about, like I said, was bringing it around. Well, now that this knight's in here, I realize, I probably can't move that a-pawn just yet. But if I put this knight here behind the bishop, then my queen and my knight would be guarding a4, and I could move the a-pawn. It's counted as a mistake for me to put the knight on c3, and the reason appears to be that I just undefended this pawn, the c-pawn. Okay, I get that. I totally get that. And they should have taken it, or take the rook first, and then when I take back, then take the c4 pawn. Okay, so either way, they would get the c4 pawn. Totally get that. And when they took that pawn after I had taken back the rook, then their knight would be pointed both at the a pawn and at the rook, so I would be, in some trouble there. My opponent didn't see that. They didn't see either trading the rooks being a good idea, and they definitely didn't see that I'd undefended this pawn. They decided to start breaking through on the queen side. It's counted as inaccurate, but we're still very close to even, and I should just take it. But as I said, the reason I put the knight here on c3 in the first place was to protect a4, so I played a4, which was not counted as a mistake. We're still very close to even, but again, they're supposed to take on c4, but they didn't. They took this pawn, and I had to take with the c pawn, which, okay, I understand this one. I had to take with the c pawn because if I take with the a pawn, the c pawn is still hanging. Okay, I understand that. They're supposed to take either the rook or the c pawn here. This time they saw it and they took it. So now I'm a pawn down. My best move is to run away with this rook, at which point they would play queen to e7. That's both lines. I have two lines here, both saying the same thing. If I back up and come forward again, will it do that to me again? No, now it's given me two different moves. Either rook to e2 or rook to g3. It changed order there as I was talking, but moving it back one definitely gets it out of trouble from that knight, their knight, right? Which is attacking it right now. And it also gets protected by my knight and my queen. Now moving it to g3, which is my best move, just gets it out of the way. But I took their rook, which looks like it's about the same. Of course, they're going to take back. And my best move is to retract this bishop to f2. But definitely it's not to take the knight. This is a blunder. Okay, I took the knight because I thought that this would double their pawns, but it also gives them a passed pawn. Okay, maybe that's why it's a blunder. Because when I took here, oh, it's a blunder because they can check. That's why I should have gone back with it to guard e1. But they didn't see that. They played their second best move, which is taking the bishop. But now they do have a passed pawn. I need to play knight to e4, which, okay. That's what the engine says is my best move. And it says that they definitely wouldn't take it. Although I'm fairly certain had I played knight to e4 here, my opponent would have taken it. But why would that be bad if they took? Oh, it would be very bad for them if they had taken it. Oh, because it gives up the knight. Oh, wow. Why didn't I see that? So I should have played knight to e4 because if they took it, I would get their knight and be blocking their passed pawn and be defending my two pawns, I guess. But then they would bring their queen in, right? And again, it's done the thing where my two best moves are the same move and they have different evaluations this time. So I'm going to back up, come forward, see if it'll give me two different moves. Okay, queen to c1 is now my best move, but knight to e4 is still one of the choices. But if I did go there and they took, and I took their knight, they have a different passed pawn with their queen behind it. But I guess I could take it with the bishop because my queen would be protecting that. Maybe that's why. Okay. Well, I didn't see any of those. I had no idea what to do, and I played d6, assuming that they would probably take it, but then I figured I would get their b pawn down here. So I played d6. It's not their best move to take it. They're supposed to check me, but they took it, which was a miss on their part, and it was another blunder on my part to take that other pawn. And I guess the reason is because they can check me. Again, they can check me. The game review said it was a great move for them to check me on e3, but the Stockfish here says it's much better if they had checked me on e1. But they checked me on e3, which turned out to be great according to that. And then suddenly, not only am I a pawn down, but I think during the game, I think this was the point at which I started to feel like they were playing really, really well. I don't have a lot of options here. I chose g2, thinking, you know, it's on the same line with my queen. But that allows them to take this pawn. Now, it's not a check, but they cleaned up another pawn. They have two passed pawns. They have a queen in here infiltrating, and it looks like they're going to start chopping off a bunch of other pawns. My best move is knight to d5 here, which is what I played. I also thought, you know, can come in here at some point to f6, which would be a check and be protected and give me a passed pawn if they took it. Their best move is queen to g4 check, which they did, and depending on where I go, they're going to pick off another pawn. Okay, I went to f2, which allows them, of course, to take that pawn, and now they're up almost -6, and I should just go back to the g file, but I went the other way, and it says they should check me down here on h2. And I kind of thought about that, but I also figured I'd be able to protect my queen. Well, it's just changed. It said they should capture on g5. Oh, okay, because that pawn's not protected anymore. But instead, they dropped this knight back. Now, I think that one of the reasons that they dropped the knight back is because they were thinking of, maybe they were thinking of getting away out of the way of these pawns, or maybe they were trying to come up with something where when they checked me here and I you know, I wouldn't be able to move certain places. Maybe that was part of it. Now I'm supposed to check them here. Well, I thought about that, but I didn't want to, because now if they take and I take, they're going to get that pawn too. And then they'll be up 4 pawns because they're up 3 pawns already. But that's my best move. I definitely thought I was lost here. I didn't know, you know, -5, but I thought it was probably close to that. But guess what? I have a passed pawn. Maybe I should move it. I moved that, but that's inaccurate. Now it's almost -7 again. Again, they should take my undefended g-pawn, but they checked. I guess they forgot that their bishop can take stuff after that great move earlier of moving the bishop back to that square. So they know they have a bishop. I have several places I can move the king in this situation. I chose d2 because I thought at some point I might be able to go hide behind my queen. And now they're supposed to take this pawn with one of those 2 pieces. But instead they took that pawn, this pawn over here. Now when I moved that pawn forward, I didn't think they would take it because my knight's defending it. But as you can see, if I take it with my knight, my opponent's way ahead. Now, one reason for that is probably that they can check, as it says that they would over here, queen to b4 check, and then of course they could just pick up the knight, and which is what it says that they would do. And then of course, you know, the bishop would be undefended. At that point, I would have to run away with it somewhere. But the main reason that I didn't take the bishop at this point is because they just gave up their queen. So yeah, I almost took their bishop. I had no idea that it would go from, +3 to -6 at this point if I took the bishop. And I certainly didn't know that it was because of that. I just saw that their queen was there and that I couldn't have done that before because the bishop was guarding that spot. So all those times that they could have, taken this with check with either the bishop or the queen, they didn't. And that just opened it up to this. And then my opponent resigned here. Okay, so my feeling during the game was definitely wrong. My opponent continued to make inaccuracies, not always the best move, mistakes and blunders through this whole section here. They're the right column, playing with the black pieces. There was never a string like I felt during the game. I think it was after at about this point where I started to feel like they were making better and better moves all the time, but the engine shows that's not necessarily the case. But my feeling was definitely right about that. Wow, I've gone on for quite some time here. I wanted to put my mind at ease about this game, but I also, try to learn things. I feel like I could go over this whole game move by move from the beginning 8 or 10 times and continue to learn things. There's a lot here, especially with all the problems that we had. There are definitely parts that I'm not qualified to understand yet, and I didn't even cover some of the mistakes because I skipped ahead. Well, like here, early in the opening, when my opponent puts this bishop out here, I played f3, but it says I should have just played knight g to e2, or I could have just moved the queen out to b3 and been done with it. And I still would have been slightly ahead. But when I played f3, suddenly my opponent had an early advantage, but only if they bring the bishop back, not if they go that way. And it's not my best move, but here's where some of my pawns started to advance very early, and that's how their bishop got stuck over here. Now I played knight g to e2, but it's a mistake, which gives the advantage back to my opponent. But that's because, even as early as this, they could have played d3. Again, that's their second and their first best move. You got to fix this, chess.com. That gets really frustrating when I have it set to show me 2 possible moves. What's the best move? What's the next best move? And so often, 4 times in this video, it's the same move. Everybody knows that bishop to d3 and bishop to d3 are the same move. That's not helpful. Fix that. There's obviously a bug in the way that Stockfish is displaying on this page. It's been doing this for a long time. I'm not going to, but I feel like I could go over this game a ton more and still learn things. I mean, I'm glad I won, and it's obvious why I did. Because wherever they move the king, I'm going to get their queen, and then I still have a queen. And I mean, yeah, they're going to take my knight back, but I have a bishop and a queen for their knight and bishop. I ought to be able to win that. Anyway, if you have any insights, feel free to put them in the comments, and also feel free to let me know what you're doing to get better at chess. I would definitely like to know if there are some other methods that I could use in the limited time I have available, besides just rotating between game analysis, solving puzzles, playing bots, and occasionally playing an opponent. I mean, I know I can read books, I can, do things like that, but I can't really do that on camera very well. I mean, I could try it tomorrow. I could just sit here and read a chess book and see how interesting that is for you. I probably would not be. Anyway, I'll see you next time.